Hello and welcome to The Big Picture with Thomas Gregory. And on the show today we've got Titus.
Hello.
Daniel.
Good afternoon, Thomas.
And Damian.
Hello.
Okie dokie. Well, we're going to get straight into it. And one of the things in the news at the moment is that Jimmy Carr has been in a little bit of trouble. He has told quite a controversial joke, supposedly, about the Holocaust and gypsies. This is also in the context of Whoopi Goldberg, who recently was suspended for The View for a little bit for saying that the Holocaust was not about race but about people, how people treat each other. And Jimmy Carr and David Baddiel has laid in and said that both of them were out of order, whereas there have been defences from people like Konstantin Kisin, who is in support of Jimmy Carr's jokes, saying that because one of his grandparents died in the Holocaust, and he is defending that he has the right to say this joke, and that he didn't think there was too much that was wrong with it. So my question to you boys, as an open question to begin with, was this a disgusting and unnecessary set of jokes, or is this all a fuss over nothing?
Well, I certainly think the joke was distasteful. It's not a joke that I found particularly funny. I did watch the segment. However, despite that doesn't mean that I don't think it should be allowed to be aired. Just because one disagrees with something or finds it offensive doesn't mean that you should try and shut down the person that is saying that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the interesting thing to me here is you mentioned David Baddiel, the comedian. You know, it was only a matter of hours after he'd said that, you know, this Jimmy Carr joke should never have gone ahead, that it was revealed that in something like 2004 he'd made a really unsavoury remark about gypsies himself in a joke, and that maybe he should be cancelled too. So there's hypocrisy here. What's interesting to me also is that Jimmy Carr, a few years ago, said he'd already made a joke that had ruined his career and it just needs to be resurfaced, which hasn't happened yet. That isn't this joke, 'cause this was a new joke he made. But I'd go back to the fact that, you know, comedians need to make unsavoury jokes. That is really important. I mean, the most interesting comment piece I read about this was by Jeremy Clarkson, no less. He wrote in the Sunday Times last week that he was at the seaside with A.A. Gill, the writer, who at the time had, you know, really terminal cancer. He had just a few weeks left to live, and with Jimmy Carr as well. And they're having fish and chips. And A.A. Gill said, "Oh, you know, I've just started watching The Vikings on Netflix." And Jimmy Carr, quick as a flash, said, "Well, you know, that's difficult. There's 10 episodes in it." And, you know, saying you won't be able to finish it because you're going to die before then. And A.A. Gill found it, you know, absolutely hilarious. Apparently he had fish coming out his nose, you know. But that is a joke that some people won't be able to manage because it's a really controversial one. But he said it and it worked perfectly. So, you know, who are we to judge?
Right, well,
which
on
jokes
that,
are right or wrong?
David Baddiel was saying that he made the point that in reference to Whoopi Goldberg's comments, he was saying that Jews are kind of seen, well, that the Holocaust was not about religion, but it was about racial purity, and that Jews from the right wing, the nasty right wing, say that the Jewish are not white enough, and so they refer to their race, and then we don't want the Jews running the country. And then on the more hard left, Jews are seen as extra white because they control all the money. So what he's saying is that Jews are discriminated on based because of their race, because of how they are and look and what they belong to. And so that was his criticism of what Whoopi Goldberg was saying, and he I suppose lumps the Jimmy Carr comments in with the same kind of thing because it's unnecessarily offensive. What do you think, Damien?
Well, I don't know where he's going with that. A lot of the anti-Semitic diatribe that you hear with regards to Jewish people and finance comes from the fact that throughout the medieval period, Christians were forbade from loaning money with interest. People seem to forget that, whilst traditionally Jews did do that because that wasn't in their religion. And that's where a lot of the anti-Semitic diatribe comes from. What sort of I don't understand about David Baddiel is I don't know what you read, but he sort of seemed to want to defend Whoopi Goldberg's comments through that lens, and I don't quite understand. I don't understand his balance in this at all. I don't. What you've just said to me, I can't even really give you a coherent response.
Well, don't worry too much about what David Baddiel said, but what really the question is more about Jimmy Carr and whether Jimmy Carr overstepped a line, and the questions around how far can you go with jokes and how necessary is it to make these kind of jokes.
Well, that's the point
these days.
Well, it's the point of comedy. I saw somebody pointlessly try and defend Jimmy Carr's joke by using theories of comedy and humour, explaining how the setup was slow paced, and then the actual response was very fast and shocking and sudden. Now there are all certain ways of provoking laughter as a reaction. Laughter can be a reaction to things that are uncomfortable and savoury, and and laughter can be in times of embrace as well. But this seems to be lost on people, that you can use extreme measures to provoke a reaction.
The joke was especially offensive to gypsies, of course.
Well, I imagine it was. The other thing I can't get over is the fact that this joke's been around since about December, when it first went on Netflix. And much like the Jon Stewart remark about J.K. Rowling, which was taken completely out of context, it seems to me that it's more offence archaeology, as it's been come to know. And I think Julia Hartley-Brewer was the first person to use that phrase. Is that there's a huge amount of attention within journalistic circles devoted to researching on people's pasts, digging up remarks that can be put into a certain light in order to discredit them, and I think that's more offensive and predatory than a stupid joke about the Holocaust, which he obviously... Does anyone actually honestly think he thinks that? I mean, I don't even find the guy funny, to be honest. I don't like Jimmy Carr, but it doesn't mean I'm going to say that he shouldn't have said it or can't say certain things. That is the point, of course, of a free and open society.
But would your retort on this be something along the lines of now, in light of recent developments and us being more aware of the injustices in the world, isn't it better that through comedy we kind of try to steer the conversation into less offensive realms?
No. Larry David, a comedian who is funny and I'm a huge fan of, wrote Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, in which he stars. There's plenty of self-deprecating Jewish humour and references to the Holocaust in that, on the same level as that joke. So you don't think that jokes like this should be banned? Should Netflix? The government has called for the streamer services to be more careful about what they put out, and Jimmy Carr's management has also had to reassure the performance venues that he's going around at the moment that he won't make this joke. So is there any responsibility on the streaming services / management company to curtail what Jimmy Carr is saying, or can Jimmy Carr just go and say whatever the bloody hell he wants? What do you think, guys?
Well, obviously any publisher, any distributor, any platform has a responsibility for the content that it produces, but I think the issue is less about them preventing speech and more about people's reaction to speech that offends them, that winds them up. There's much more of a trend these days for a bigger reaction where things are taken more personally, and when there is disagreement, to try and attack or silence the opponent, which I think is unhelpful, and it limits the extent to which we can actually engage with each other. The other quite interesting thing about Jimmy Carr's joke is that before he said it, he sort of announced that he was telling some career enders.
He did.
He knew that the joke.
He also said the lesson afterwards is that I'm bringing attention to the fact that it wasn't just Jews dying, but also gypsies.
Exactly, and so he knew the joke that he was saying was as horrible as it is. So he wasn't saying it because he thought that it was okay, or he was trying to stir up any kind of hatred. He knew exactly what the joke was like when he said it, and so his point was almost, I'm saying this joke and I know everyone's going to lose their minds. this is where we've come to as a society, where you tell a joke and people go mad. And
so if loads of people are going to lose their minds over it, is it not a very appropriate joke? Should he not be making these kind of jokes?
Well, I think that his point was as much trying to poke fun at and criticise the existing sort of court of public opinion, where people will get very stirred up about a joke, and his perspective would be that it's just a joke. I don't mean any of this. I'm trying to make people laugh, and you're all going to take this very seriously, and he knows that, and he's poking the bear.
Right.
Well, you seem to refer there in your original question to the online safety bill that seems to be coming through. Was that the case?
In part, yeah, they are.
I mean, that's the worrying thing, because we've talked about,
but also ministers have come out and criticised it. For example, Boris Johnson and I think Nadine Dorries have both come out and said that Jimmy Carr shouldn't have made these jokes. Well,
yeah, I mean, you're talking about offence archaeology and cancel culture. I don't think has been mentioned yet. But what is worse than having a culture that evades through our culture, society, companies, whatever, the big tech companies, would be a law system that also supports it. I mean, that's going even further than culture. The online safety bill, from what I've read, seems to say, well, legal but harmful posts can be taken down without warning, and the companies will be fined 10% of their turnover. I mean, at that point, it's like, why even bother risking putting up offensive things that might not actually be offensive? And you're going to seriously limit free speech. So there's a big campaign to get rid of that.
But why should that matter? Why should a curtailing of free speech in that example be a bad thing, Daniel?
Because we must look to find out.
Well, the entire principles of Western civilization would collapse. Might be a starting point.
It's the best way to find out how you should approach anything in life, is to have a reasonable debate like we're doing now on the in the public square, in the media, wherever it is, and for that you need free speech. Cornerstone of liberty.
Anything else on that, Damian?
I think you covered it pretty well.
So you're all then in reasonable agreement, maybe, that Jimmy Carr should be allowed to say these things, and that Netflix should be able to keep this show, as well as the clip of it being on YouTube as well. And also that he should be able to say whatever he at his live show. If he chooses to say this joke, he should have every right to, and shouldn't suffer. Should he suffer any consequences by saying it at the live show and then no longer be able to do his shows? Do the show people have the right to say, no, Jimmy, we don't want you to do the rest of the shows?
I think that if people don't like the joke, they don't have to listen to the joke. They don't have to go and watch Jimmy Carr. But I think we start to get dangerous when you get certain high-profile figures calling on the distributor to stop distributing, to stop anyone else listening to the joke. I didn't find it a funny joke. I'm not going to listen to it again. But I think when you start saying that other people also shouldn't listen to it, that's when you have a problem. Allow people to choose not to listen to it themselves and make a reasoned judgment.
Well, the head of Ofcom said the same thing. She said, I'd love to regulate Netflix in light of this comment or this joke that's been made. Do we really need any more infantilisation of the public sphere?
Well, I've got a question then. In that case, so that shows that obviously that there is no way of government. Well, it's much harder for government regulators to control the big Netflixes and the Disney Pluses, etc. Are we thinking then that we're going to see, as possibly we already are, see a move of a lot of these more controversial comedy, which used to be reasonably mainstream maybe, but is now becoming more controversial? Are we going to see that move onto the private world, where people have to pay to access these kind of companies for the privilege of listening to controversial jokes? Are we seeing a transition of where controversial comedy is actually being, instead of being on BBC ITV, is it going to be on?
Oh no, I think
private sector.
I think comedy is struggling at the minute. I think comedians don't really know what to joke about, so they're kind of, a lot of the comedy appears to me to be quite surprising. It will be like, you know, a lot of
absurdism and stuff like that. Yeah.
Sexual remarks in particular, and they are occasionally funny. But when your entire comedy is based off that, then you struggle. And look, to return to the question that you asked earlier, right? If it is a free market and these jokes aren't funny, people won't watch it, and Jimmy Carr will have to change his jokes anyway.
But I would like to see the viewing figures for some of BBC's comedy shows compared to the amount of people that watch Jimmy Carr, because, like you say, the other thing that a lot of comedians that don't want to push the boundaries end up joking about is they produce a lot of dead material about the fact that they can't joke about anything, but the jokes never go anywhere. When was the last time any of us watched Live at the Apollo? A new one. I mean, come on.
I watched them live at the Apollo last week.
Oh yeah.
And I can't say it was hugely funny.
Yeah.
In fact, what was quite weird about the Live at the Apollo episode that I was watching is that there were two comedians, and they were both basically insulting about the fact that they had kids. Like they hated their children. They were both making the jokes about how bad their kids were. So I don't know. Maybe that's the future of comedy, guys.
Hopefully, a temporary blip.
Okay, so last question then before we move on. What do we want to see? Do we want to see any change in the world? Do we want to see easier for comedians to make jokes like Jimmy Carr? Do we want it to stay the same? Do we expect them to get abuse on social media and is that rightfully so, or would we like to see a harder clamp down on it? Go, each of you say something on that, maybe. What you want, if you want any change or not, or if you can't control it, but
yeah, for sure. I think that what I would like to see would be a culture where people maybe were less bothered by offensive.
But isn't
material.
that easy for you, all you three to say, as all white middle class men?
Well, there's no actual force within any institution of any control that actually advocates what we're saying.
No.
Ofcom don't say it. There's no political party that supports. There's no funding that supports our point of view.
There are times where someone will say something that I will find offensive, that I dislike in a personal manner, but as much as I might then criticise them, engage with them in debate, you can still react to something, but it's the point where you decide that something that has been said that is offensive towards you means that the person who has said that thing shouldn't have a platform, shouldn't be allowed to say anything again. You can engage with what they're saying, but when you decide that no one else should be able to listen to it and they shouldn't be allowed to say anything like that again, I think that's when you have an issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's that on Jimmy Carr. We've got war on woke teachers next, so this will be fun. This is some Springsteen, as Damian might have guessed. Got a bit of Springsteen the Rising. And welcome back to The Big Picture. We've got Felix who's joined us.
Hello, I apologise I'm late. Due to freedom of speech, I had nothing to say.
Okay, so the second topic is war on woke teachers. Because it's been in the news that unfortunately there's been a little bit of a telling off towards certain primary and secondary schools for being too political towards certain controversial topics that are politically contestable, and so the government is now wading in and saying that teachers cannot they can cover as all the topics that are age appropriate. However, they mustn't teach political subjective topics as objective truths. And so one example is that a school in Nottingham, I believe, had to write a letter to the Prime Minister, or had to write, or it was part of the task at least, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister saying that he must resign because they don't have trust in him anymore. But the head teacher came back and defended that and said it was all about learning how to write critical arguments and stuff like that. So with that in mind, where are the lines for how teachers can give their political opinions? And do you have any kind of opening comments on this?
Look, it really distresses me because I hate to think that within a state school education system at least you have any, you say let's write a letter to sack the Prime Minister, let's talk about politics in this manner. It's really bad, but unfortunately there's not really that much you can do about it. It's interesting, I was reading yesterday about what Thatcher did to the education system is the same problem in the 80s. She was really fed up with the fact that schools and universities were left wing. But all she ended up doing was centralising the education system and giving the government more control over it, the exact opposite of Thatcherism, supposedly,
So
as an ideology. Yeah, she ended up achieving the exact opposite to try and curb left-wing education. And I think I'm worried the exact same thing will happen here, because the local authorities clearly can't be trusted to do anything but teach left-wing stuff when it comes to politics. They're going to have to further nationalise it. It's like there's no good option here. There's no good solution. That's essentially what I'm worried about.
So you don't think a centralised education system is a good
I don't
thing
want it, but it
inherently?
might be necessary, because the thing is, it's come up so many times. I mean, you talk about Nottinghamshire. It was just it was last year. I think you had a chaplain in Nottinghamshire who did a sermon to children, and he talked about saying you don't have to accept all the Stonewall teaching that's coming in, and he got referred to Prevent by the teachers. I've met that guy. I mean, it seems, interestingly, in the UK it's the deep south, so to speak, in Brighton and the Isle of Wight, the wokest.
The deep south of wokery.
The deep south in the UK.
Right.
I mean, you've got a Brighton school just a couple of days ago, an exclusive in the Daily Mail about it today. That you don't use the term mum or dad anymore because it's not included.
Well, the government have come in and said that comments like that.
They've stepped in.
So the government has come in and they've stepped in, a la Thatcher maybe, and said that we need to draw the lines here. But you don't. Do you think that that's a good thing that the government have stepped in? Do you think it was necessary?
It's probably the least worst option.
It was the least worst.
Is what I'm saying. But look, it comes within a whole line of issues. I'll just state two more. Another Brighton school in 2018 was found to have hold on, I've got it written down. 40 children not identifying as their sex at birth, 36 gender fluid in one school in Brighton, and I've met the family who in the Isle of Wight took their 6-year-old out of class because they were basically forced to call this male student a girl at 6 years old. So there clearly is an issue with woke teaching in schools.
Well, I think, I don't know whether it is a legal requirement to respect people's gender pronouns, but I think it certainly caused a lot of stirring in Canada a few years ago with Jordan Peterson. I don't know what the rules are here. I think probably yes. I think you probably legally ought to. I'm not entirely sure. Any others want to comment first? Open comments on what they think of the war on woke in schools.
Well, I'd go a lot further than that and define critical race theory as revenge-oriented ethno-fascism, which holds race at the centre point of moral worth, historical understanding, and our future and intellectual and personal pursuits. Nearly 100 years ago, a Marxist called Antonio Gramsci identified that it would be the cultural world that would need to be influenced rather than the economic and political to place our society into a position which would be ready for some form of revolution. Their goal, often stated quite openly by some intellectuals like Judith Butler, who's particularly interested in gender, is to completely transform our conceptions of race and gender so they're unrecognisable because, as she and others argue, they are what we probably are familiar with the term social constructs. Thus any established truth that we come to know in our society is not actually so, because I should go back on to, a lot of this is based on dialectical Marxist thinking, and within the German ideology, Karl Marx writes quite clearly that human nature is dictated by economic relations. There is no constant in human nature. There are no constantly observable truths. So it comes to a point where they have to completely transform race relations.
Damian, you're referring to Judith Butler, who's a feminist academic. Are you maybe being a little bit falling into a little bit of hysteria, a bit of rainbow scare, maybe, in the sense that you're thinking that this is more of a problem than it is? I mean, isn't it a good thing that that maybe we're more aware of these topics and teaching these topics in schools, and don't teachers have a right to give their own opinions on these kind of things?
No, I think it's inherently fascistic. It's the opinion of agents of the state. In this case, and some of the cases mentioned, people like Brighton and Hove City Council members, such as, I've got a name written down here somewhere. I can't find it. But it's agents of the state dictating attitudes to race which are based on mythological or theoretical foundations. That, to me, sounds quite fascistic. It sounds like the definition of fascism to me. I'm incredibly uncomfortable and disturbed that this is taught. And I would, more can be done. It can be described and legislated as extremist content and completely banned from being taught, which I'd like to see.
But surely the state always decides what is taught in a system like this. You can't get away from the fact that the state is going to set out the curriculum and say what is okay and what is not okay.
So are you comfortable with the state saying that you are by definition guilty by your race?
Well, that's exactly.
I'm not saying that, and I suppose that's the issue, that there are some schools.
Well, inaction is a policy. The Conservative Party is the most guilty party here that has done absolutely nothing to repel this. It's taught within it's done within this. It's within the civil service as well, and all the civil service are rebelling. There's no way that the Conservative Party can control this, and they're not even trying, because they're so desperate to win people over that support these views to their side.
But is it the case actually that, I don't have the polling with me, but isn't the case that most people actually don't follow critical race theory and believe in that? So why do you think then that they are pandering to this minority of people that believe these things? Do you think they are genuinely? Do you think they are actually wanting to get these people on board, or do you think that it's actually just ignorance or ineptitude of the government that is causing a certain selective of schools to teach this aspect? Because it isn't widespread. This is an issue with a few schools, but of course it makes good clickbait for the Daily Mail and the Daily Express.
I think I would agree with that view more, Felix. I think that obviously it's hugely important what is taught in our schools, and there needs to be a common sense approach to how we decide that. But I do think that these sound, and they always are, more isolated incidents. You hear about one school or one teacher somewhere across the country. Well, there's many schools where everything is broadly, that there aren't. These are the outliers that we're talking about, and it's easy to construct a narrative where you just hear about the outliers and you don't get a good picture of the actual.
Is it not getting worse? Is it not getting worse?
It may be, and this is why it's still worth discussing. But I don't think we should overreact, and I think there are parents will react. Like you said, you knew people who had taken their 6-year-old out of a school in the Isle of Wight. If there are certain councils like Brighton where this happens, and people, as Felix says, and I think is correct, that most people don't subscribe to all this sort of new theory, then parents will move their children out of these schools, and there will be a natural rebalancing in these areas.
No. Well, yes and no. I don't entirely disagree with you, but let's get this straight. It's a minority of parents that are actually going to ever react to this. It's really difficult to fight against your school when they're teaching it, and let's not take this lightly. I mean, there was, again, just a couple of days ago, it's been revealed to the national press that a school in London had this privilege chart where you could work out how privileged you were. What's your gender? Well, male is the most privileged, then female is the next most privileged, then transgender is the next most privileged, and then intersex. What's your faith? Well, Protestant is the most privileged, then Catholic, then Jewish, then atheist, then agnostic, then Hindu, then Muslim, etc., etc.
So that's interesting. They thought that Jewish was higher than atheist.
Well, it's funny because we were talking about that earlier, and it's a complicated one.
Can I say why I really hate that? Because they also have it on race, which is perhaps just to me the most disgraceful, because I'm sure we all here think that we want to move towards a society where race doesn't matter anymore. I think the amazing thing about children is that they don't see race as being a particularly important thing, and here are teachers bringing in, well, actually race is important. Why don't you see your black and white classmates in a different light? Okay, so to give you some context, Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch, she explains that in the Commons, I think probably in the last few days, that she affirmed the government's position, saying that it's wrong to teach children that they objectively inherit racial guilt, and she condemns the active and open support for Black Lives Matter, which is an organisation with some quite strong words. If you want to actually watch the
The Equalities Minister for Brighton and Hove City Council actually quoted BLM as being, and she was an advocate and supporter and has appeared at rallies, and she was a key proponent of teaching critical race theory in the classrooms. A city of 300,000 people. So when I hear comments like isolated instances being put together and the dots being joined inaccurately,
and the government,
the fact is 300,000 people are being taught this.
Every single person in Brighton is being it's part of
the city's anti-racism campaign.
Kemi said that it's wrong to teach these as being the objective support for these things. So there is obviously concern, and it's obviously made it to government level. So there is some level of concern about this. But she says that critical race theory shouldn't be said as an absolute truth, because she, for example, disagrees. She sees it as an ideology that sees my blackness as victimhood and their whiteness as oppression. So that's what she said, and that is the government's position on it. And so they have maybe recognised that there is some level of worry about this, but at the same time, you might be right, Titus. I don't know whether these are the extent of whether this is isolated or just us re-evaluating our cultural normative opinions and moving with the times, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. So it's a balance, right?
For sure. And I do think that there is an issue here, especially when there's the children are young and not able to sort of understand all the nuance of these positions. And I do think the government is right to raise this and take a position, but I don't think we should treat it as if it's happening everywhere, all over the place. We should go in certain places like Brighton, which you'd probably expect given the MP they elect, the council. It's happening, but it's not nationwide.
But it's an ideology that is absorbed with or without legislation. For instance, we didn't have pronouns on emails 10 years ago, so a lot of this is absorbed, and the opinions are passed down, whether or not it's actually part of a council's strategy or so-called anti-racist strategy, even though it's the most racist ideology that we've had in Western democracies for going on 70 years. I just don't understand how people can't get more riled up about this. It's so evil. It teaches that by definition on race, people have privileges, and that they should be taken back by the masses. Does that not sound like something that destroyed all of Western Europe all those years ago? Does that not sound exactly the same but with a new face?
Well, okay, so we're looking at the case. There are a few teachers. Damian, you've highlighted the danger of this. That are saying these sort of woke /left /progressive values. Now, it is probably the case that almost all teachers have some level of a political view. The majority of these teachers do not express any subjective opinions. But is it... I mean, I don't know any examples. It's not the sort of thing I imagine the Daily Express or the Daily Mail would report. But would there be the case that there probably are some teachers on the right of the spectrum that are also saying things like Black Lives Matter is objectively wrong, which is obviously, that's a subjective opinion to say something's objectively wrong if it's not necessarily if it can't be proven. So
and also then second to that, is there room? I think as it was in my school,
vandalism.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Is there room in schools, like in lunchtimes and stuff, where you actually have a conversation with the teachers? They can obviously give their opinion. When you're having in my school, they'd give their open opinions, but they can't teach lessons being biased. So there are two elements to this. Are there people on the right who are also overstepping the mark, and to what extent should teachers be free to give their own political opinions in certain contexts? And don't take too long on this as well, guys.
I mean, I don't think there were any conservative or right-wing teachers at my school. I mean, as far right as you got was Lib Dem at the time. And, I remember watching the 2015 election, and it was all, I can't believe the Tories have won. And 2016 as well, that, my school was basically perennially depressed throughout the entire day. And if you look at the polls as well, I mean, it's about 18% of teachers voted Tory. I imagine they're mostly within the private sector, and amongst academics it's even lower. So it's not a pinpoint basis. If it was, the Daily Mirror would pick it up. You talk about the Mail and Express.
Interesting, in my school, we did a student body vote, and we all voted, and it was a Conservative UKIP coalition that won.
The Conservatives
That's
also
that's the pupils being intelligent, you see, but not the teachers.
Right, last points, Damian and Titus.
No, I'll just pick you up on the saying that Black Lives Matter is not objectively a bad thing. And violence, looting, arson, destruction of businesses would seem to be a pretty objective thing to say is wrong, and to tell children not to do. And we wouldn't sit by and say that if an extreme right wing group was doing the same things, we wouldn't step by and say you wouldn't say that's a subjective way of looking at it. You'd say no, that's objectively wrong. And we shouldn't tolerate those actions from political organisations, political bodies, or individuals.
Yeah, I think there is space for debate here. I think it's just having the debate in the right space. Primary school probably isn't the right place for that, and so we can have a thorough and nuanced discussion about these ideas, and there is place for that in our society. There has to be, and I think it's more that, yes, when it's primary school, obviously children aren't always able to fully understand and grasp all the nuance of it. So
I can't even teach them to read and write, and we're obsessed with indoctrinating them with this. I mean, come on.
So this is great comments, everyone. Thanks for that. This is now Sam Fender with a song about his political kind of disassociation and being stuck between two sides. This is I.
This next section addresses allegations regarding the Prince's Foundation, not the Prince's Trust. The Prince's Trust was incorrectly named in this podcast, and the Big Picture apologises for this mistake.
Hello and welcome back to the Big Picture. Well, trouble in the palace. Although it is the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to celebrating that in June, her sons, there have been some troubles surrounding them. So Prince Andrew, who's been in the media quite a lot recently, but he's recently settled due in a sexual harassment case, not admitted any guilt for it, but he's paid money, and then there's a question of where that money has come from. It is reported, and it's just reported at the stage that that money is coming from Her Majesty the Queen, and if it comes from the sovereign grant, then it is coming from the taxpayer. Although that hasn't been confirmed, but the palace has been asked where this money is going to be coming from. And Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, the Prince of Wales, although he personally hasn't been accused of committing any offence, his charity, one of his leading charities, the Prince's Trust, which helps people get into jobs and help young people progress in life, it has been reported that someone called Fawcett, who is a valet very close to the Queen and Prince Charles, has helped a individual try and achieve an honour. So it's cash for honours scandal back again, but this time relating to the royal family. This is obviously not very good for the Queen and her image, and in such a year where we've got an extra day bank holiday, 4-day bank holiday weekend, not looking great in terms of, if you just look at the papers. What do you think to this with Prince Andrew and Prince Charles?
I saw that somewhere that the in part of the settlement, Andrew was not allowed to repeat his denial of sexually harassing or assaulting Virginia, the lady. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce her surname. So this settlement does look quite damning for Prince Andrew, and obviously by extension brings the royal family into that. I think in terms of the money, they'll have to be very careful that it is detached from the sovereign grant, or else they will be in for a lot of criticism. And I know the Queen is more aware than anyone that the monarchy's legitimacy rests on public opinion to a large extent, and it is it has potential to be very fragile. So it's certainly concerning, and I think the Queen will have to be very careful to ensure that the money is not out of the public purse, and that Prince Andrew is hung out to dry, and it's the responsibility for this is left with him.
To be honest, Titus, I slightly disagree with you there. I think there's a couple interesting things to point out. The first is that we should wish Prince Andrew a happy birthday. He turns 62 today. So, you know... Are
you going to call him a war hero as well?
Well, no. What I would say is, you know, he's having the worst birthday ever. I mean, I couldn't possibly have a worse birthday than that. Also, you know, you've got Jeffrey Epstein's friend has just committed suicide in a prison in France, I believe, which is kind of just like astonishing. It's unbelievable. I wonder how big this paedophile ring is. But what I would disagree with Titus is I think the future of the royal family rests more upon whether some of these Caribbean states and Commonwealth states across the world decide to rescind the royal family and the Queen of their head of state, rather than I don't think Prince Andrew is going to dramatically alter the polls particularly. That's my guess.
It was interesting you mentioned the Caribbean states. This isn't really relevant to this, but the day after the Barbados declared independence, they started doing military operations with China. It's not really independence. I don't really know where we're supposed to go with Prince Andrew. The man is more, well, not actually, but pretty much a convicted paedophile. Is this going to affect? He's not, but more in the court of public opinion he is. Is this negative or positive for the royal family? It's obviously negative. I don't really see there's that wide a chasm for debate as to our opinion.
He's not.
Yeah,
but it affects its effect on the institution. Because I want to go back to what Titus said, because I asked this to another guest. Is my personal sort of gauge on this is there's more respect for the Queen than the institution of monarchy, which worries me. Because I think the monarchy is incredibly important. But I think once the Queen dies and we've got this flack on Prince Charles that we're coming to, Harry and Meghan, again, very controversial figures. You've got Prince Andrew. The only ones that seem to be relatively normal are Prince William and Catherine.
And Princess Anne.
They're so far down the list of becoming a monarch.
Do you think that most of the British public are going to be able to separate the actions of Prince Andrew to the institution? I imagine that looking at polls, I don't think Prince Andrew has affected the polls in terms of the opinion on the institution. But Damian, you are absolutely right. I mean, Peter Hitchens makes this point that a lot of the affection that we see is on the Queen rather than the institution. But is it the case that anyone that is really against the monarchy will be further against the monarchy because of the with what's going on with Prince Andrew, and those that are in favour of the monarchy are either going to say, well, obviously what has happened with Prince Andrew is not great, but I still value the institution and I can separate him, or of course there's a smaller number of people that will defend Prince Andrew, although he is not looking very popular in the polls. I think in YouGov's popularity he's quite low down. What do you think about just to wrap up, or we'll finish last point, what about Prince Charles and the cash for honour scandal with the Prince's Trust?
I'm not sure how significant a story this is, given
I didn't know about it, Felix.
It's ongoing, isn't it?
So maybe that's just you being a massive monarchist. Maybe you're
I'm completely impartial, I can assure you.
I think, especially in light of the Prince Andrew story, and also that it was not directly related to anything Prince Charles had done, I think it will be dealt with as a governance issue in one of his charities rather than anything personal. I do think, though, it's very important the way the Queen responds to Prince Andrew. I think there has to be a level of accountability, or else people will... the taste in people's mouths will be increasingly bitter when they think of the monarchy, and there needs to be a level of accountability in all areas of society, as we've seen when it comes to cancel culture or anything. People are very eager to hold anyone accountable for anything, and I think whilst that has gone too far in some spaces, I do think when there's serious misconduct, there has to be you can't be above reproach.
Well, for example, Emily Maitlis said that what Andrew has now settled, it seems that doesn't line up very well with what he told her in that famous interview, for example.
It was comedy gold.
She's just suggesting.
I'm glad someone finally would admit that interview was funny.
It is a bit of a tragic one, really.
Surely that joke
not
should be
very
cancelled
nice
as well.
Yeah.
Thing for her.
Well, if you believe in the nutters that listen to critical race theory, they'd actually describe the reason that Andrews got off so lightly as monarchy and being the institution which defines their theory. It's too good for them. They love the monarchy existing because it seems to prove all their points with this. That Epstein managed to basically get away with everything. That Andrews got off with a civil settlement. This stuff sort of adds to their narrative. But with the interview. And then, obviously, there was the clause. Have we mentioned that the clause in the settlement, which mentioned that he wasn't allowed to continue his denial? Yeah. We'll be talking about Prince Charles, though, aren't we? We're supposed to be talking about Prince Charles.
Well, I mean, if it hasn't been picked up by lots of us, then obviously it probably isn't going to be.
It was a lead story in the Sunday
Times. Mubarak bin Mahfouz, his name was, who's a Saudi Arabian businessman who's domiciled in the UK. Received a CBE on November 2016. Tens of thousands of pounds are reported by the Guardian to have gone into the Prince's Foundation, not the Prince's Trust. I want to get it right because otherwise that would be libel. Clarence House, where Charles and Camilla live, have said that Charles has no knowledge of this. But it turned out that bin Mahfouz had spent £1.5 million renovating properties owned by Charles.
Oh, what is this with renovating properties?
Yeah. It's an interesting point you mentioned there.
Wallpaper from John Lewis.
It clearly seems people don't take too much interest in the renovations of and certainly how they're funded of their.
Yeah, and the Met's been handed a number of documents by Clarence House. Relating to this, but the investigation is ongoing. They've not actually said that they're actually launched an investigation, and no interviews have been conducted under caution.
For Cressida Dick to look at.
She's already gone, hasn't she?
No, but she's. I think she still stands. I think in her position while they find her.
Oh, well, yeah, for a 6-figure pension as well. Yeah.
Well, they're trying to get rid of that. Carr is trying to get rid of that. I read today. Well, if you want my summary thoughts, I mean, I think
you are the last comment
for the next 2 decades. It will be a playground rhyme. Prince Andrew's a nonce. Ultimately, though, I don't think I've heard of him before this scandal. I mean, can you name any of his brothers or sisters other than Charles?
What, Prince Andrew?
Prince Anne and
Prince Edward.
Prince Edward. I mean, I could probably tell you the whole family.
I think people will forget, and it's a shame about Charles because Elizabeth has obviously been political twice in her career, and Charles has clearly already got a scandal before he's monarch. But it's a shame, but it won't destroy the institution.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you to Titus, Daniel, Damian for coming on to the big picture. It's been wonderful having you. We've had some very interesting topics indeed. This has been The Big Picture with Thomas Gregory
and Felix Hawes.
And to send us out, we've got Griff and Sigrid, Head on Fire. Thanks very much for listening.